Ambassador Greer, thank you so much for your time this morning.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
I want to start with Greenland, because it's kind of been the elephant in the room. For Europeans, some have called it an existential threat. Others I've talked to have said this is really just a distraction. From when you arrived to now, have you seen that issue become a little bit less important? Have we de-escalated at all?
Well, listen, everyone brings it up. And they bring it up because the president has been very clear that he views it as an important national security issue for the United States. It's on our northern reaches of the North American continent. It's incredibly important to him and to the United States, and has been for a very long time, by the way.
It's not, we have a military base there.
We have a military base there. We defended it in World War II when the Danes couldn't. So there's a long history with Greenland. So obviously it's come up. Mostly it comes up with me because there's the tariff angle. We have a trade deal with the Europeans. We're still trying to get them to lower their tariffs like they promised they would do. They haven't done that yet. So they bring up this potential tariff action on the Greenland side. For me, I try to keep those separate. For them, they put them together. I understand they have different national interests than we do.
You had said, though, this week that it's possible the president is using it as a negotiating tactic. Could this now change the trade agreement you had set in motion with the European Union? Well,
the trade agreement really is purely about trade. It's not about national security. Greenland is a national security issue. I just came from a meeting with European Trade Commissioner Sefcovic, who I have a great relationship with. He raised this issue. He gave me the European view. I relayed President Trump's view, of course. It's not a term of the trade agreement, and this is what I keep trying to say: is we should compartmentalize these things.
But for the Europeans, it'll be an additional tariff.
Potentially, that's right. Yep.
So for them, it is part of the trade agreement.
Yeah, and I understand how they feel about that. I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that the trade agreement with the Europeans did not purport to solve every problem. And it didn't solve every problem. It solved a lot of problems, and it put us on a good path. But there are a lot of things it just didn't cover. Even trade things, right? There are things about pharmaceutical pricing or digital that aren't quite covered there. And it certainly doesn't include, geographical or territorial issues.
Do you see this administration using tariffs to gain new territory?
I mean, the president has been really clear, and the United States has always, been aware of territory that's important for it geopolitically. You've seen the president talk about the Panama Canal. Obviously, we're talking about Greenland. Interestingly enough, one of the last times the United States acquired territory was getting the U.S. Virgin Islands from Denmark in last century. So there's a long history of countries acquiring territory through purchase or other means.
You're working with the Europeans now on critical minerals, choke points that come from China. How challenging is it to work with them on critical minerals when the president is threatening tariffs on a national security issue like Greenland, which you could actually get critical minerals?
Sure. I would say the critical minerals in Greenland, I'm not familiar with all of the deposits, et cetera. Conditions there to extract them are challenging, but they do have critical minerals, is our understanding. Critical minerals are also in the continental United States. The United States is taking a lot of unilateral actions on critical minerals to support new facilities and new mines in the United States. We're working with allies and others. We're trying to have negotiations on critical minerals to expand that, take what we're doing in the United States and grow it.
Has Greenland made it harder?
I mean, it doesn't make it harder for me, right? I think obviously it complicates it for the Europeans because they're trying to, loop Greenland into the trade issues. They want to combine the national security and the economic trade issues. I'm less inclined to do that. My own sense is, let's see what happens over the next few days. The Greenland issue, it's really at the leaders' levels. It's not, certainly not USTR. The Secretary of State's working on this issue, the Vice President, the President. I think we need to give a few days to let this process work through and see if we can find a good way forward.
Prime Minister Mark Carney had a very blunt statement yesterday to Davos. He's talking about basically if you're a middle country and you're not at the table, you're on the menu. He talked about a new strategic order with China. He just got back from a trip to Beijing. Are you concerned that some of this aggressive tariff policy has unintended consequences of pushing your allies towards your biggest adversary, which is China?
So I think that is really overblown. First of all, everyone trades with China. The United States trades with China. Europe trades with China. Canada trades with China. The Canada-China deal, it's not a comprehensive deal. It's really a trade. The Canadians put a big tariff on Chinese vehicles a couple years ago. The Chinese retaliated like they always do, and they did it on Canadian canola, which is an important export. And so the Canadians said, well, instead of having a tariff, we'll have a quota. We'll have a hard quota on Chinese vehicles. So from a substantive point of view, I think that has been a little bit overblown. I am focused on suggestion about Chinese investment into Canada and that kind of thing. I'm not sure that's healthy for the North American relationship. So we'll be looking at that. I just think that Canada, I mean, the Prime Minister himself said it, they're a middle power. History doesn't swing on the hinge of Canada's geopolitical decisions. 75% of their GDP depends on the United States. So I'm not terribly concerned about it. They're always going to have a constructive relationship with us.
When it comes to China, I'm sure you've seen the record exports that are still coming out of China. But the United States, those exports are actually down.
Yes.
So these goods are going elsewhere. Does USTR have tracking of the transshipped goods that are going to other countries and then entering into the United States?
So we've done some analyses on this, and there are a couple different ways this happens. There's kind of the actual illegal transshipment where you have a Chinese good that might go to Vietnam or Indonesia, and they just say it's an Indonesian article and there's been no change. That's an issue that Customs and Border Protection, they track this. People who import have to verify this, and so there are investigations about that kind of thing. Separately, there's the idea that you have Chinese goods, components and parts going to other countries and being assembled elsewhere and then coming into the U.S. Legitimately as products of those third countries. That's something we watch quite a bit. The reality is, as you mentioned, our trade deficit with China has really improved over the past 10 months, which is a great development. We do have some insight into parts and components going to third countries. We understand that development. That's the kind of issue in the future that can be dealt with rules of origin, et cetera. We're really focused on finalizing our trade agreements with others, keeping stability with China. We're in a good spot. We can't solve every problem right now, but transshipment is one that we're very focused on.
The Anthropic CEO had said to Bloomberg this week that selling high advanced chips to China is like selling nuclear weapons to North Korea. Do you think the United States should be selling advanced chips to Beijing?
Well, I saw those comments. I think they're kind of the most extreme thing you could say about it. The United States export control policy has always been fluid. That's how it is supposed to work. As technologies advance, older technologies become less sensitive and they can be shipped overseas. And so in the Trump administration, there's been an ongoing dialogue within the administration, with members of Congress, with industry, with consumers of chips, with producers of chips, to figure out what's the right balance for national security and commercial interests. And the president himself has made some of these decisions.
What do you make of Congressman Brian Mast's bill, which is basically saying that we need to regulate, Congress should be regulating these chips?
Well, Congress passed a law, the Export Control Reform Act back in 2018 that updated and gave new legal authorities for export controls. The Commerce Department has authority to implement those regulations. I mean, my view is if Congress has a view on this and they want to, take a stronger approach and take a more hands-on approach, they can do that. They can pass a law. Congress is notorious for proposing laws and never getting them passed. To me, I think it's important that we have a conversation with Congress, regardless of whether they pass a law or not, on their views. I think all of that goes into these conversations. And remember, when you see something that says, we're shipping these chips to China, every time that happens, whatever company wants to make that shipment, they have to make an application to the Department of Commerce. And on a case-by-case basis, the Commerce Department looks at it. They check who the end users are. They check what the security measures are. They check, who's going to be touching it along the way, and they make a decision based on that. That's a process that's been around for a long time. We execute that process in the Trump administration. We feel comfortable that we're, honoring our national security obligations.
Ambassador Greer, I just wanted to give you a moment to reflect on where you are right now.
Yeah.
I was thinking back about your Senate confirmation hearing, and I remember you talking about how you grew up in a mobile home, how your parents worked multiple jobs, and now you are here on what your colleagues have said to me is the epicenter of the global elite.
Yeah,
but you are having these high-level conversations. What is it like? How does it feel?
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in a small town in Northern California, and we had mountains like this with, snow on top of them, but we didn't have chalets. We had, mobile homes and things like that. Listen, to me, it's very important that normal people, regular people, have a voice in what's happening, and that's a great thing about the Trump administration. They have a very strong working class base, and so that's a voice we're bringing. It's a voice I bring, right? I've been very fortunate to be in the U.S. and be able to, climb the ladder of success thanks to, my parents and people who surrounded me. And I think that opportunity that we have in America, everyone else should have this too. When I go around to other countries, they have an elite, right? A lot of those elites are here, and they don't have that kind of opportunity. Even in Western countries, there's not the opportunity for advancement. So I think the American model, where we have growth, we have it available for every walk of life, I think that's one of our most important exports.